Alrighty, guys, welcome back to Hotel Evening Weekend Platoon. Today is week 20, day 3. And we're going to be talking a little bit about something called the React Context API. Um, so we're just going to start off with some of the stuff that we talked about yesterday. Um, Again, sort of going on the flow that we had for how to handle tokens on the front end. And you'll remember that we had two different folders. We had one which was our React tokens, and then in the other folder, we had the wine API. So, could somebody explain to me what we did yesterday in order to connect these two different applications together? Like, what was the purpose of doing? Or I guess this would have been Tuesday, actually. I stand corrected.
Yeah, so we connected the React application with the Django application. So
Cisco,
the
you're coming in a little quiet.
how about that look better? Is that any better? Hey guys, can you hear me?
We can, it's like super faint.
Okay, hold on.
All right, no worries.
All right, how about now?
That's a lot better. There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that. Um, so yeah, we connected the React front end or React application with the Django application. We did that through the use of um, uh, in Nginx, and yeah, we basically set it up so we had a web server inside of the Django application where we routed the URL uh, support 80, and we enabled it to basically we enabled the React application to communicate with the Django backend application.
Yeah, that's a really good summary. Thank you. So I think in other words, yesterday or Tuesday's exercise was all about, like you said, connecting Django to React, right? And we have this handy little flow chart that I think Jordan was referencing, where we have the user component and the API component. So, Art, which one of these is Django and which one of these is React? In a very broad generalization.
Um, hmm, I would say the user is going to be on the front end. So it'd be React.
Yep. Yeah. So the user part is basically all of your user input. It's whatever you're clicking, you're typing, which is summarized by the moniker of React, kind of. And then the API, well, designing all of that is done in Django. So something important that I just want to touch on briefly for today, again, going back to this, is the relationship between the user and the API is bi-direction, right? The user sends stuff over to your API, like your username and password for signing up and logging in. Um, but your API sends stuff back to the user, right? The API will send over a token that'll send a response if the authentication goes through. So yeah, keep the fact that this is a two-way street in mind as we keep moving forward. That is very important. All right, so again, when we're just thinking about this out loud, we had the React tokens as being our front end, right? And the DRF wine API as the back end. So I just want to go over what we did or on Tuesday in React tokens super briefly. And then we'll jump to today's context state branch and chat a little bit about the differences between the two. So let's see, we don't need public. Main things I want us to take a look at in here are going to be in source. And let's take a look real quick at the API. So, what I like to do personally whenever I'm seeing either a brand new React project or one I haven't seen in a little while is I will just like to go through every single file and just see what's going on. So, let's see. So this one has this is a fetching function, and then this is interacting with the authentication API. And it's pinging off of localhost 80, and it's executing a sign up, getting token, and then getting wines from that. And again, localhost 80, as I believe Cisco mentioned, is something that is set up. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Is it in editing mode? Okay. Well, anyway, that localhost 80 is something that we set up in the DRF, right, in Django, to be the thing that we're pinging off of. So this basically just sets up, this module allows us to ping that and get stuff back, whether that be, again, successfully signing a user up or logging them in or getting the lines, etc. Now, this is good. This is good for us to keep in mind, that we already have these functions built. However, if we log in, we also need to be able to log out, which is not something built into the API for auth, but it's just something good for us to keep in mind, right? Because we don't see a login function listed here. We don't need one listed in the auth API.js, but we need to make sure to remember that we need to build in a login function. All right, so that's our auth API. And then in our components, we've got this form, and that's just for submitting your username and password. We've got a nav bar with, again, a logout button. That's great. And then the display for each individual one. Now, none of these really rely on authentication so much, like in general, except maybe the form, but we'll get to that. And then now let's just go ahead and play with the pages. So, all right, so we've got our list of wines in here, takes in a user token. And the important thing for us for authentication is if we have a valid user token, then we can get all the wines. If we don't have a valid user token, then nothing's going to show up. Right? And that's what we want. We want the user token to be locked of sorts behind. Oh, sorry. We want the we want the wine list to be locked behind that authentication wall, right? Which is again where that user token comes in handy. Right, so we got our list wines. We've got our login page here, which just double checks if we have a token associated with that username and password, right? If you have a token, then you have somebody that has the correct username and password. If a token doesn't exist, then it's the wrong combination of username and password. So we should not let that person log in. So somebody explain to me what should redirect is and why we need to use that.
I'm taking a guess. I believe that should redirect. Does that re-render the page so it removes the data from the input box?
Okay. So how did you come up with that answer?
It's something we were like talking about yesterday. And maybe I have it confused with something else. But that's yeah, that's what I thought I'd remembered about it.
I mean, that is a good answer. Um, it's not completely correct though. It's close, but there's one or two things that are missing from this, which more specifically is related to the usage of should redirect. And so we define it up here on line 10, but it gets used down here, right? On lines 20 and then 23. So let's try to dig into this a little bit. So it says, if not token, then there's an error message. Else, meaning that a token exists, then we're going to handle the token, and then we're going to set should redirect, set the state to be true. So if the state is true, then we're just going to automatically navigate to the WINES page. So it does kind of clear the username and password field, but more specifically, it just takes you back to the WINES page. And if you think about it, you only want to be taken to the WINES page if you are logged in. If you're not logged in, then you're not going to be able to see anything there, thanks to what we talked about on the list WINES page, where it's locked behind that authentication. So, and that's kind of where should redirect comes in, is helping you to, again, once the user is logged in versus not logged in, defining that divergent behavior chain. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, so much more. But so it's basically changing the state based on receiving a token.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean that's exactly what lines 16 through 21 are doing. It's the state of should redirect is dependent on the existence of the token, which equals successful login or not. All right, and a couple more pages here, and then we're going to jump to today. We're talking about the login. We've got this logout feature, which then removes the user token, and it says if you don't have user token, it takes you back to the login page. So nice and simple. Sign up. So that just has you fill out this form. That then, let's see, await sign up, which is another function that we have. And then again, we have that should redirect shows up again. Now it's the exact same function or exact same state, right? But here we're assigning this state to so we're assigning the state to see if the user has been successfully generated, right? So if we have a successfully generated user, then the response should contain the user's username and password to say this is a successful sign up. And if that's returned, then we're going to redirect to the login page that the user can log in. Right, and then that's the WINES page. We don't really need that. All right, the last thing we should definitely talk about is what's in our app.jsx. Now, the one thing that is important to keep in mind is here we have the WINES and the logout pages are both contingent on the existence of a user token, which makes sense, right? Because you can only view the WINES page successfully if you have a token, and you can only log out of a page if you're logged in already. And again, because we're doing token via auth tokens, or right, or authentication via auth tokens, the way that we know if you're authenticated is if a token exists. So that's why user token is located as an attribute of these two components. It does not need to be an attribute of sign up or login, as those two are not dependent, if you will. on on the pre-existence of a user. All right, so that again was just a super relatively quick refresher of what we went over yesterday. Are there any questions about that before we keep moving on?
I have a
Nope.
question, and I apologize if it confuses anybody. But I'm trying to picture our database and our different tables. So, like, let's say like, every time somebody signs up, then it's going to alter our current database, right? So if we were to pull out of this and get into this shell, then we would be able to look at our database and we could see all the people that have actually signed up. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. However, that would be in the Django shell. Again, the API is something that is was created with Django. So you wouldn't be able to see that through React or necessarily through um, a JavaScript shell, but you would be if you went into the Django shell or ran a Python script.
Okay. And Omar, just like as a guess, what type of tables would you say this wines has? I imagine users, I imagine wines, but what other tables? And I'm thinking about my personal project. What type of tables would you guess that exist in this database?
Well, we can check that. So here, let's see. Let's pop into the code actually and take a look. So I'm gonna just let's switch to here and let's do an ls examples week 20. We're gonna go to the DRF and let's open this up in VS Code and see what types of models this thing has. Because again, this is just a Django project. And as you will recall, everything in Django, any table that gets created is based on a specific set of models. So we don't care about web server, we do care about accounts probably and wine API. So we've got a table full of wines from the wine API. And then we don't have anything in accounts natively, but if you were to go into Postgres, like the old way that we used to do it when we were first learning Django, you would probably see a users table, and maybe a couple of them. So that would definitely be one that would probably show up. Um, that's probably it. But that generally, the other thing is that will get auto created. Um, yeah, yep. So you've got a user table right there because that's just a generic Django model. But again, that gets auto created by Django. So I wouldn't worry about creating a different version of that unless you kind of have a very customized user model.
Okay, that's good to know because I thought as part of our personal project, we're gonna have to go in and create a bunch of these tables but
You will,
I will.
but not necessarily, depending on how you do your authentication, you may or may not have to create it for your users. You will still have to do it for your wines or for your Pokemon or for your cars or whatever it may be.
Okay, understood. All right, thank you.
Yeah, that was a good question. Any other questions before we jump to today's stuff? Okay, great. So here I've switched tabs to React tokens now. Um, and again, this is going to be on should be on the new branch. I can check that in my VS Code by going to the source control tab. Also, I absolutely love they've now added this graph thing to source control. I don't know when the VS Code devs added this, but it is actually incredibly helpful. So it shows you, who made the first commit, and then when, and then what files were changed. And then up here, you can see the update. So this is an update that I made to create a brand new branch and changed a couple files. And this just shows you basically the changes that happen all within VS Code. I think that's really helpful also to keep, again, track of your versions. Also, if you look down here at the bottom, you can see which branch you're on. So here it says I'm on context state versus the main branch, which is what I originally cloned down. So that's also great to keep in mind. Again, I like the versatility of features of VS Code for this is extremely, extremely helpful. So keep that in mind as a way to check yourself when you're working with React or with Git version control. All right, great. So now we talked a little bit about what we did from yesterday. So there's one thing to keep in mind from what we did yesterday, and I'm gonna again switch tabs. So excuse my browser switching here. How did we keep track of whether somebody has successfully logged in or not? Before we look at the code, what thing did we use to keep track of that?
I'm assuming it was the state. We were tracking the state.
Well, let's take a look. Let's go back to our app. We use this thing called user token. What is user token? In terms of like things in the React world that we think of.
I believe it was a const.
Okay, that is true. And Art, you're right that it is a state, or can be within a component. However, right now, we're treating user token as a prop, right? Because a prop, again, is something that gets passed between React objects. Now that's not a bad thing. But sometimes you can run into problems when you're passing down a prop instead of just from a parent to a child, from a parent to a child to another child to another child to another child, and you get like 10 children deep, and you're still passing down the same prop. That institutes a form of further dependencies between all of the different child components on that same prop that gets passed down. So again, you're kind of worsening the problem of nested components if you just pass the same prop between all of them. So there is a nice built-in feature in React called use context, which helps us to, I would say mitigate completely, but to work around that problem a little bit. So let's go back to VS Code to talk about how that works. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to talk about this brand new file that I've created. This file did not exist on the previous branch, right, not on the main. And I put this user context file inside of a specific context folder. So now the first thing that you'll notice here is it's a very simple file, right? It is basically 3 lines. I'm just creating a context. Now, what on earth does a context mean? A context is similar in concept to a global React state that a component can tap into or pull from as needed. Now, again, let me reiterate. This is similar to a global state. That means you don't need to pass it down as a prop every time you want to use it. You don't need to keep passing it down through child components. If you need it, you can just go access it and bring it in, kind of like a global variable. But again, a global state. So you don't necessarily want to make every single state a context in React, because then you've just got a ton of stuff floating around globally, and you may not want that. But for things that you know are used in a lot of different parts of your application, turning it into a context, especially if it is a state or state dependent, is extremely helpful. As again, this avoids you using components as intermediaries. So does that concept of a context versus a normal state make sense? Any questions about that?
So Omar, we're still going to have like where we had the prop, we're just going to shove in the create context const in that same position. It's just not going to be a prop, so it's going to be a little cleaner form.
Exactly. Yes. So here, let's talk about an example of how that works. So this is oh, that's not the right one. I wanted to go to main. There we go. So if we go back to our main page here for app.js. As you can see, we're passing forward our excuse me, we're passing forward our user token, right? In the as a prop, versus with user context, you don't necessarily need to pass this through, which again is one of the main benefits of doing it this way. So let me switch my screens over. And if we take a look at the app.jsx in here, we see that again up here in this top route, we just have wines and that's it. Yes, I know in logout I did include it, but in the wines case at the top, we didn't actually include a user token being passed down as a prop. Instead, we put the user token up in here as part of a provider, which is slightly different. So the provider is kind of what enables you to use the context that you're looking for. So not just anybody can access the user context. If you want to access user context, it has to be wrapped within the provider at hand. So in that way, it helps to simplify your routes just a little bit. Other hand, it also can help you to simplify your subcomponents. So if we go to, it's a good one. Oh, we talked about wines and how in the wine section here, we don't have anything listed there anymore to pass forward your user token. If we go up here to wines, again, we'll see in here, we are not passing down a prop. Instead, we're pulling the user token via this use context and user context thing that we created. So again, by doing this, we are avoiding bringing that down as a prop. Otherwise, everything else that we do in here, creating the list, the use effect, the way we're manipulating user token, all of that's the same. The only real difference is that we're now using a context for this instead of a normal state. So let's see where else this shows up. So we talked about the user context. Let's see. This doesn't show up here. This does show up in logout, and I did forget about that. But the reason that we still need to pass it forward for log out, um, is because again, we need to make sure that a user is logged in order to log them out. And the only thing that we actually need here is a way to set the user token. So if we go back to our app.jsx, technically we don't even need to pass forward user token. We should just be able to pass forward set user token. Which is again distinct from user token. And let's see what else. Yep, sign up doesn't have it. Um, but yeah, so again, it's today's lecture is not meant to be too complicated, but I hope that this helped give you guys a better sense of why it can be helpful in a very small way, but it becomes more significant as your application spirals out of control. To rely on context and not just normal passing down a state via prompts. Questions, comments, concerns before we wrap up lecture?
Well, yes, Umar, I wanted to bring up in order to actually get this application to run, I had to do quite a few I had to make quite a few changes. Specifically with the package JSON. If you can click on the package JSON, now when Jordan ran this yesterday, he actually got it to run. I don't know if he had changed anything beforehand, but he actually got it to run successfully as a demo. But when I actually ran it through its paces, I realized that it was the let's see. Oh no, go to the Django. Well, go to the Django side of it.
Oh, you don't actually have to run the Django one.
Oh, you don't have to run it.
Nope. So the Django one only has a package lock.json, right? It doesn't have a package.json.
Mhm.
Yep. So for that one, you just need that to. So when you run the what is it like run setup.sh or a file like that, that
Mhm.
spins it up automatically in the background via
Yeah.
Docker, right? So again, remember, we're not trying to directly access the API itself in this. We're trying to design the front end to do that. So you don't necessarily need to interact with the API in the way that we used to play around with Django. This is meant mostly for you to focus on the React front end part of it.
Oh, my apologies. I meant the requirements text. That's what I.
No,
That's what
all
I
good,
meant.
all good. To be honest, when I cloned them both down, and I was like trying to think through this myself, I spent probably a good 7 minutes trying to figure out why the Django thing looked terrible and was broken. And then I realized you don't actually have to run that. You just need to run the React tokens part.
Okay.
And I mean, just to demonstrate that, okay, forget all the error messages. That was when I did things without doing things fully. But here, let's go all the way to the top. So, yep. So, you go into I went into my folder. I went into the wine API. I
Mhm.
ran my run compose.sh file as the
Mhm.
first thing I did. Um, it goes and does all of its Docker magic, and that's it. As
Right.
it does,
So
the moment it finishes doing that, then we stop because then
yeah.
it's doing everything in the containers in the back.
Right. So when I did that, and when I performed the dot run sh run compose, I actually got the error that the scicog version was wrong. It couldn't find
Oh,
originally it was like scicog 2 point something something. I had to actually change it to scicog 3.2.9 in order for mine to work on my Mac. I don't know if it was a Mac issue or what, but
interesting.
uh, did
That's
anyone
good to
else come
know.
across that?
Yeah, I have not. I was able to do this successfully from ground zero, but Art or Adam, did either of you guys run into that issue?
Well, my big issue was the version. I'm sorry, the branch. And then once Jordan fixed that, we were uh I had to reload. Well, I did a whole like pruning of the Docker, so it was reloaded for me, and so I never actually got it back up. But Adam made the change on the branch, and I believe I'll let him speak for himself, but I believe he got his up and running.
Okay, yeah, that is good to hear. Um, but yeah, Adam, did you run into any issues like relating to versions of packages or anything like that?
Um, Not once I did that whole thing with the branches and whatnot. Everything just kind of fixed itself. But I don't know, maybe that's just like something because it's my machine, a different machine. I don't know. It could vary.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so that is really interesting, Cisco. Thank you for bringing that up. It does look like you're the only one who had that issue so far, but I would be interested to learn more about maybe why that happened, because that is definitely strange and interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
it may have been actually so I had an original DRF wine slash API uh project from before, from earlier. And so um when I actually forked that new version and with the new branch, with the with auth token branch, um I believe that's where the conflict came in at, where it had an old psychog 2 point something, and the new one
uh,
had, it conflicted with what was in the new file, I guess. So I think
that
that's where
that
the
might be
problem
it.
came
Or maybe if you had a previous virtual environment related to this running or something like that.
in.
That
Right.
that is very possible.
Yeah.
Um, and that's usually also why I guess small thing that I like to do to avoid that happening is whenever I'm done with Docker for the day,
Hmm.
I'll just go into my Docker desktop and I'll shut down every single container and every single image, every single volume, and I'll just delete all of them unless I
Right.
know I can use them again. But otherwise, it's just a good way to keep things clean and I take a step to avoid that from happening.
Right. Right.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, but once you run that run compose, your
Hmm.
Docker is running in the background, your migrations are done. Um, and then again, over here, let's see. Yeah, you can see over here in the Wines API, I originally tried to run it like a React project, and that very much was not working. Um, so instead, I switched over to React tokens, brought that down, checked out my new branch, or in your guys' case, you'll be cloning down the branch that I created. And then you just run, your usual npm install, npm run dev, forget the errors, but then that'll kick it off. So why don't we just do that right now? So I'll show you guys that the code that I just ran you through actually works. Let's go here, screen. What's this? This is gonna be, no, I don't want a new tab. I said localhost. And if I go to my wines page, it's blank. We can sign up. Art and art will be my password. It's nice and short. Sign up. This persists. We'll go to log in. Ta-da! I can see all the wines because I'm now logged in. And I'm still logged in. And I can now log out. If I say I want to log out, I'll go back. It's deleted. So this is the exact same function as uh, token as a state. But all we're doing now is we're using token as context instead of token as state. It's almost identical principle. Exact same effect. Just helps simplify things a little bit and avoids those vertical dependencies. Any last questions before we get to homework?
No,
In our personal project, can we just use the prop state instead of going to create context?
Um, could. I would personally just recommend using context instead. It is just a better coding decision. Um, but if you really wanted to, you can. All right, so let's stop.